Stephen O'Meara. He's a contributing editor for Astronomy Magazine. Used to be an editor for Sky and Telescope Magazine as well. He's got numerous awards. He's got the Lone Stargazer Award, the Omega Centauri Award, the Caroline Herschel Award for his greatest achievements, including the determination of Uranus rotation period. I mentioned at the opening address that we had 5 speakers that have asteroids named after them. Steve is the first one. And asteroid number 3637, O'Meara, was named in his honor for his contribution. Without reading the rest of those, I'll let you know that he's also going to have an informal gathering at the fire pit tomorrow night, 6:30 to 7:30. A lot of people don't know that Steve also has discovered or visually saw the spokes in Saturn many, many years ago, when Christ was just a little guy. And he was told that if he's going to do serious astronomy, he shouldn't fool around with such nonsense, because it's just not possible to see that.
Who else is new?
Of course, Voyager in 1977, when it was launched and passed by Saturn, noticed, oh my goodness, there's spokes there. Steve saw it. He also recovered Halley's Comet at how many thousand feet? 14,000 feet?
Yeah.
Breathing pure oxygen. Long before he was the first human to visually recover its last apparition. I also want to mention that I've had the pleasure of knowing Steve for that many years and have worked with him as an astronomer. We've traveled together all over the world on volcanoes, and that's going to be the topic of his talk today. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you my good friend and brother, Stephen O'Meara.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, by the way, there's a lot of his books are at Bob Summerfield's place, and he'll be glad to sign them and sell them to you.
And one more interruption. If you all can turn off your cell phones or put it on vibrate as a courtesy towards you.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me. And of course, it's been a few years since I've been here, and I'm really thrilled. Thank you, Tim, for inviting me, and Tippy, as you said, for being my brother and a companion all over the world. 3 of our assistants who help out with our volcano research are here. Julie, Bob, and Tippy, could you please stand up? Okay, Bob Banrud and Julie Kim Zong from New York. Tippy Dioria, someone who I think many of you know, scarred Ireland. He couldn't be here tonight, but he also is a contributor. And of course, there's also Larry Mitchell from the Texas Star Party. So a band of amateur astronomers have helped me, my wife and I, do the research, and without their contributions, I'm telling you that it's invaluable. We essentially monitor volcanoes 24 hours and do shifts for long periods of time to collect the data that you'll probably see. Now, this is a culmination I'm going to be telling you about for about 30 years of research. It really is. This year marks the 30th year of research in this topic. And so it is astronomical. The moon is the Earth is an astronomical body. The moon is orbiting it, the Earth, and there are physical effects that we're trying to find out whether or not we can see in volcanic eruptions, which is something to do mostly on full moons, right? So it's really fun. So, but the point is, let me go back one, is not a lecture about the full moon. A lot of the information you're going to see, you're going to hear me talk about, is going to mention the full moon, but that's just one aspect. That is part of the, we go there for the photography. The light of the full moon in the volcanic landscape helps us to get better pictures, which you'll see. Of course, anytime you mention any kind of correlation with the full moon, you get sort of a weird glance. And that's what I'm trying to break. I've just been always a renegade observer. This is sort of pasture land, where the science is all about that, the investigation of the unknown. And without the courage to investigate the unknown, I don't think we would get any progress at all. So this is just an update on the progress we've had over the last 30 years of research. And so what we're really saying is not so much whether the full moon affects volcanoes. Just get that out of your head. What we're trying to say is, can we see a tidal signature in volcanic eruptions? So that this is Eyjafjallajökull. That's the, believe it or not, of all the volcanoes in the world, that's the most difficult one to say. This is in Iceland, the one that recently erupted. So can you see a lunar signature as the moon is at certain points in its orbit and you have tidal stress? Can it go from an eruption like this to one like that? You know, so it can be a more powerful blast. Or can you take an eruption, but instead of having one powerful blast, can it be broken up in a short period of time into several segments of blast? In other words, if you had a Coke can, shook it up and opened it all at once, everything would come out. But if you had a twist-off cap, you could also shake it up and they go psst, psst, psst. You can release the same pressure, but in the same amount of time. So this is part of what we're trying to look for in the volcanic signature over a long period of time throughout its history. So what we're really looking for is, does the moon affect the magnitude or frequency of volcanoes already in eruption? Okay, that's the key. I'm not saying, you know, Mount Vesuvius hasn't erupted since the 1940s. You know, the next full moon is going to be, you know, in 2 weeks. Will Mount Vesuvius erupt? We're not saying that at all. What we are saying is that if a volcano is erupting, can we suddenly see something happening that we can measure? And in fact, the way we measure, and you'll see, is actually the same way we measure degrees in the sky. We pick a location and we use our hands. And you can do trigonometry and you can figure out the height of the plume, the intensity of the plume, all this stuff using astronomical techniques, simple astronomical amateur astronomy techniques. That's just as one of them. Now, I live in Hawaii, and of course, you might think that I can have, at any time, access to information, and that, unfortunately, that's not true. A lot of the molten rock goes underground, and there's no really way to measure the amount of flow. There's like 100,000 cubic meters per hour being poured into the ocean. It's just no way that you can get an idea of the sense of the magnitude of the molten rock that's gushing out of Kilauea at any given moment. So what you need is something different. And so that's why a lot of times we actually have to climb volcanoes. You know, for instance, when I'm done here, I'm on my way to Guatemala, and on Sunday I'll be climbing, in fact, this volcano again, Pacaya in Guatemala, which is an old friend of Tippy's and Bob's. And so, in fact, stepping away, you don't have to be on top of the volcanoes to always register them. In fact, it's easier to be away at a safer distance so that you can measure plume heights and monitor the activity and actually, like I said, be a slight distance away, be a little bit safer, yet get the same data. So the whole thing began for me in 1982. I'm just going to give you a background history, and it was just a weird occurrence when Kilauea opened, and I happened to be up on Mauna Kea at the time. It was in September of 1982. This is the Gemini scope, of course. This was not there back then, but this, ironically, is where I found recovered Halley's Comet on this site right here. They actually removed that telescope now, and Gemini Observatory is there. But I would happen to be looking at the moon through a 24-inch telescope. We were up on Mauna Kea, and then we got a call that Kilauea had erupted, and you know, we went outside, and you could see the glow burning through the volcano burning through the clouds. So we rushed down, and it just so happened that at the time we were looking at the moon. It was directly overhead. It was a first quarter moon, and so it was just in half, and it was just there, directly overhead. And so by the time I got down to the volcano, I had just kind of mentally made a note that the moon was directly overhead and the volcano was in the prime of its eruption. Well, the next year, I actually moved to Hawaii temporarily, and I was able to record fire fountain phases. This was a period of time, where, or maybe over a period of a year and a half, where it had these high fire fountains. These are low fire fountains, and then they would go up to sometimes 1,500 feet. This both of these are aerial shots I took. This one here is about 800 feet high. It's the same cone, just different intensity. But you can see the difference in magnitude, the difference in power of the eruption. And it turned out, and this is just no surprise, if you were just there, you knew the fire fountains occurred on certain lunar cycles. You know, maybe it was first quarter, maybe it was full moon, sometimes it was new moon, but always near tidal maximum. In fact, the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory scientists, you can go on their sites, they have it listed. And this is a quote from them: "Fountaining episodes each occurred remarkably close to fortnightly tidal maximum." In fact, it was on the percentile of greater than 95% of all the maximum fire fountains occurred at near the fortnightly tidal maximum. Okay, so this is just basic knowledge, and it wasn't a surprise at all. I mean, to me, as at the time, really into planetary astronomy, it was just normal. In fact, Thomas Jagger, who founded the Hawaii Volcanoes Observatory, I mean, look at this quote. This is from the early 1900s. "To think of volcanoes as anything but periodic and gravitational in their relation to the globe would, to me, make the science of volcanoes entirely uninteresting." That's a great quote. It's just like, yeah, it's just normal. You know, to say that the moon does not affect volcanoes in any way is like saying physics doesn't work. It has to affect them in some way. The point is, can you see the effect and can you predict the effect? That's totally different. But the moon has to affect everything. It does pull on everything. So it's just, you just have to see if you can see the signature. And of course, these are Hawaiian opihi pickers. It's the most dangerous job in the world. But we're used to seeing ocean tides. And really, I know maybe some of you are thinking that I'm thinking the moon is affecting that tiny little bit of molten rock, not an ocean, you know, and you really can't see. And it's not that at all. I think it has to do with the gas pressure within the column of the volcano. But we have not only full moon and new moon and the periods of last quarter and first quarter as interesting times in the lunar orbit, but we also have times of perigee and apogee. So the moon in its orbit is swinging back and forth between perigee and apogee because it's in the ellipse. And we have different effects. So the Earth is constantly being pulled and tugged, pulled and tugged. And again, you know, when you look at back in the 80s, we had it was pretty well known, Apollo 12 and 14, with few exceptions, moonquakes occur monthly intervals near the times of perigee and apogee. Okay, they have seismic stations on the moon. This is NASA data. It just makes total sense. Also, of course, when Voyager went by Jupiter, we have Io. We had the volcanic activity occurring on Io, which is caused by tidal stresses created by Jupiter and the outer moons. Io is constantly being pulled and tugged. So volcanic activity, gravitational stresses seems to be related. And again, the question is, can you see it? This is a rare image, actually, looking down into the throat of one of the volcanoes in Hawaii. So you can actually see the molten conduit. And back in the 1800s and early 1900s, they had analysis of lava tide measurements of Halemaumau, that's the lava lake, concludes there is enough evidence of tidal effect to warrant repeating the work by a different method for a longer period. So again, in the history of volcanic research, people have always been looking for this. My wife Donna, I mean, during this time in the 80s and early in the 90s, it was a lot of fun. You know, we just go out into the volcanoes and we were just having fun. The lunar tidal theory or hypothesis, as you want to call it, you know, it was always in the back of the mind. To me, it was just a given. I never really gave it much of a thought beyond that until two events happened in 1991. First, right before this, in April of 1991, there was a major eruption in Japan, Mount Unzen, and two famous volcanologists, Maurice and Katya Kraft, were killed in what's called a pyroclastic flow, superheated avalanche of molten debris which incinerates you. Anyway, it killed something like 50 people. And then in 1991, Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines erupted. I went down there, and I was there when 50 people were killed in a volcanic mudflow. And I tried to save a very young girl, and I couldn't. I had to be saved myself, being pulled out of the mud. And after that, it was just a given. It's like, we're not fooling around anymore. We need to research volcanoes. And so my wife and I, in 1993, founded Volcano Watch International. And it was to investigate lunar tidal theories, because we found that Mount Pinatubo had actually erupted on a lunar tidal during a maximum tidal point. And also we found a correlation at Mount Unzen. So we tried to start working on that. One of the first places I went to, because I also saw the devastation of the very large eruptions, was to go to Stromboli in Italy, in the Aeolian Islands. And this volcano is almost in perpetual eruption. And I just happened to be there in May 2 to 6, 1993. And during my stay, the eruptions were phenomenal. Not only that, it was also one of the weirdest nights of my life. I was up there frozen. I wasn't prepared for the altitude and the cold and the volcanic blasts and so on. But while I was there, and I couldn't help but noticing, and this is from the Smithsonian Global Volcanism Network. Back then, they had recorded, a high level of eruptive activity was reported. Eruptive activity increased dramatically after the nearly full moon rose, peaked when the moon culminated in the southern sky, and waned before moonset. Lunar perigee, when the moon is closest to the Earth, occurred that night around 1 a.m. So again, here we have Hawaiian fountaining, and then we have a different type of more explosive volcano erupting more greatly, more forcefully, also showing what appears to be a lunar correlation. Now, we don't have any dramatic facts yet, but again, this was, yeah. So I collect letters from scientists and also in conversations. So I get feedback. I start saying, hey, there may be lunar correlations, with Stromboli, and I shared it with someone who actually studied Stromboli. And it was, well, let me read this to you, okay? Kind of entertaining. So, dear Mr. O'Mara, you are wasting your time. To find a correlation between the moon and volcanic eruptions would require infinite lifetimes. You would need to prove it at every volcano around the world, let alone Stromboli. I, too, have looked into a lunar correlation at Stromboli and have found none. But I did find a correlation at Mount Etna in Sicily. So okay, so I'm saying, well, thank you for your comments. That was really enlightening. And so, what else can you do? So my wife and I went to another Strombolian-type volcano, Arenal in Costa Rica. And fantastic eruptions, we call this the boom cycle. We were able to, it was just, these eruptions were just magnificent and house rattling. And yeah, it was just incredible blast. And you could not just disassociate the fact that, there was a cycle related to the activity. And so this is when Tippy, Bob, and I, Scott wasn't with us at the time. This is a later photograph, but it was basically Bob, Tippy, and I. We returned to Arenal, and it's a beautiful volcano. It's just, again, the reason we go there around the time of full moon is for beautiful photography. Now, we try to record everything. These are drawings that Tippy made. This is at a later date, but just to give you an idea of the type of, beautiful accuracy, we just sit there for 24 hours. We take rotation periods. We record all the eruptions, and we basically try to interpret what's going on. And there was a fantastic blast. This was in 1996, and we were monitoring the volcano for days, and we found about a 6.5 hour period between the largest blasts. And both Bob and Tippy just jumped up and they were saying, oh my God, this is a lunar cycle. And we predicted almost to the minute this big blast right here. Basically, what was it, Tippy? Like, it's going to occur at 11:30, or what was it?
Well, we told
Midnight.
The visitors, yeah. We told the visitors there to watch Friday night because that's when it's going to happen, and they all looked at us like we were crazy.
Yeah, and so
we were, but we didn't want them to know it.
Yeah, I know. It's that simple. So we have there, and in fact, this was a shot, both Bob and Tippy have the exact same shot, and this was on the cover of Parade magazine. And so it just to show you the amount of activity and the blast. And it's sort of what we did at the time. Now, I'm going to say this is in the preliminary days when we were just trying to understand the volcano. We were just beginning to learn how to really monitor the volcano to see if there was anything. And we were doing it, trying to see if we could make associations day by day, hourly by hourly. And one of the things we found, like I said, is that the maximum eruptive activity, this is the magnitude of the eruption. So these are the most powerful blasts, and that's what I told you in the very beginning. We're looking for not cycles in the minutia down here. We're trying to find the most powerful blasts. But this is just one day of, a long period of work. But look here's moon set, which is a low tide. Now this one falls out of place, but remember this spot right here for now. And then we have moon rise, another little tide. So that's an interesting little correlation. And so 2 out of the 3 most powerful blasts occurred at a time of moon set, moon rise. But nothing happened here, but remember that box. That's going to come in later. So anyway, we found a period, on average, about 6.5 hours during the 1996 eruption. Meanwhile, we returned to Arenal. We collected more data. During that, we found that Dr. Glynn from the University of Montreal had independently studied Arenal, and he had said gas and tremor fluctuations show a distinct correlation with Earth tides, suggesting that volcanoes such as Arenal may be sensitive to small changes in the confining pressure of stress regime in the conduit. In other words, gas regime and what's holding the volcano down and the release of pressure. So this is all interesting. We found all this data. We had 2 years worth of information that I had collected, and I had all the data, and I went to the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory. I had actually seen one of the volcanologists at a supermarket, and I said, I have this data I want to share with you. I'd love to have your opinion. And he said, sure, come by Monday. So I came by on Monday. I'm sitting there. You have to understand, I'm so excited. We have all the data we collected. I typed it out, printed it out, showing the correlations, and I'm jotting up there. And then I knock on his door, and he says, come in, come in. And I walked in, and I'm standing there, and he says, wait, before you sit down, I just have to tell you, before you say a word, I'm not going to believe a word you say. Honest to God, almost exact words. And so I just said, well, thank you very much for your time. And I walked out. I was very cordial. I just said, thank you. Then I see no reason to show you what we've produced. So anyway, so I'm sitting there thinking, I love this quote from Carl Sagan. We make our world significant by the courage of our questions and the depth of our answers. And I kept having repeating to myself, just like with the spokes. Everyone's telling me I'm insane for pursuing such an absurd idea of spokes existing as Saturn's rings because of Keplerian rotation. They tear the things apart. And all I could tell these guys for 4 years before Voyager got there was, hey, they're there. I don't know why, I can't explain them, but they're there. The answer is not to dismiss them because of no knowledge, is to try to find an alternative as to what could explain them. So it's the same here. It's sort of, I'm not saying there is a correlation between the moon and stressful tides. It's just that I have observed them, and I am trying to find out, well, we have observed them too, our team members, and we're trying to find out if there is one. So that's all I'm doing, and there's absolutely nothing in the pursuit of science that it just follows normal procedure. So we all have to dream. So I'm sitting there saying, what's one thing that could prove, even beyond a shadow of a doubt perhaps, that there is a correlation? So I dreamed up an idea, and that was, there's a constantly erupting volcano here in Italy, Stromboli. There's a constantly erupting volcano here in Costa Rica, Arenal. And down in here in the South Pacific at Vanuatu, there's another constantly erupting volcano. So I said, listen, if the Earth's rotating, then if we monitor the volcano at 3 different locations, at 3 different longitudes across the globe, perhaps we can see the same type of eruption. See, each volcano is going to erupt differently, and I don't care about each of them. I'm not saying every eruption has to be great. It's just during the duration of time that you're at a specific volcano, you should see a certain cycle. And can we see that cycle, no matter how large or small it is, repeated, but delayed in time as the Earth rotates? So that was a dream. And believe it or not, it was just shortly after the dream occurred, we got a call from National Geographic, my wife and I. And they had been monitoring our work, and they just said, we're interested in your research, and we might want to do a film on you. It took a year of going back and forth with them. They flew us in. We had to make presentations to the entire staff, and so the end result was they did a program called the Volcano Hunters. Now, and it was an incredible thing. They made the dream come true. They hired 3 film crews, 3 independent film crews. They had my wife and I, Larry Mitchell, and another team member at Stromboli in Italy. They had Tippy Dioria in Scott, Ireland, in Costa Rica, at Arenal. Now, they couldn't get the film crew together to go down to Vanuatu, but there was another volcano in Guatemala, Pacaya, which they did. We set up a team there. So we had simultaneous monitoring of 3 different volcanoes by 3 different film crews, by 3 different sets of team members, all pursuing the same activity. Now, these guys were, unfortunately, in Costa Rica. The volcano had a massive eruption right on, during the lunar tidal stress time, and it basically blew its guts. So you had
4 days before we got there.
yeah, just 4 days before they got there. It was just such a shame. But they did get some interesting data and everything. But it was just unfortunate. The volcano just wasn't responding because it essentially exhausted itself. And the same happened at Pacaya. The fire fountains had stopped, and it was just a lava lake. And we only had us at Stromboli. And let me just show you, it wasn't the best of time. Perigee and full moon were pretty separated by several days. So, this is all, I had to do it all on air. It was live. It was really one of the first live TV shows. I mean, it's like, there you are, right there, in your face. And this was the predicted time of maximum activity. Now, I want to show you the most powerful blast that occurred. We stayed there on the volcano, camped for 2 weeks, recording data 24 hours a day. All right, and this is the data that we collected from and you can see. Now look at this. This is the predicted maximum, right between perigee and full moon. Look at this. And these are the loudest, most intense, powerful blasts that we had. So this particular one here, I thought was interesting. Now, for no other reason, I just decided to call it a mystery peak. Because it was intense, I had no idea why it occurred then, falls out of the regime of prediction, but I thought it was interesting for no other reason. Most people might have just said, take it out, throw it away, put it in the trash. I just put it in the back of my head saying, hey, that was an interesting phenomenon. So, now I know. So we got our data, it aired, and then the volcanologists came out in force again, and they actually printed this, all right? Now, remember what I said about Vesuvius? Okay, this is almost verbatim. Look at this. This is their response. And it was titled Tidal Lunacy. Okay, great. Now let's start predicting eruptions based only on this information. The fortnightly tidal maximum occurs at full and new moons every 14 days or so. The next tidal maximum will be the new moon on November 15th. Will Mauna Loa erupt then? Almost certainly not. The Mauna Loa is a volcano in Hawaii that now hasn't erupted in 25 years. But that, again, totally missing the point. Never said I could predict when a volcano that's not erupting, okay, will erupt. So missing the point, as far as I'm concerned. But they have the louder voice. But it doesn't matter. It really, honestly, it doesn't matter. We continued our research. Bob, Tippy, and I went down to Soufriere Hills, Montserrat. We have Hawaii fountaining phases. Above the 95th percentile of the fountains are going off at fortnightly tidal maximum. We have interesting correlations between tidal stresses and strombolian eruptions at both Stromboli and at Arenal volcano. Here's a totally different volcano, totally different type. It's called a dome volcano. And this dome volcano, this stuff is very viscous. It grows, and then it just calves off. And so this is a beautiful island in 1994. I think I went down there first, when it first started to erupt, all right? It was the Emerald Isle of the Caribbean. And then this is what it looks like today. It's just been totally erased by, this is one of Scott Island's beautiful shots with the Southern Cross. And, I'll just hold that for a second. But you can see how at night it illuminates and it glows.